What if I told you there's a group of people who were expelled not once, not twice, but over 100 times, across continents, across centuries, from Spain to Russia, from England to Yemen, from cities that no longer exist to nations that still deny it? Why were the Jews forced to flee again and again, century after century? Why did kings, caliphs, and even democratic governments push them out, burn their books, seize their homes, and blame them? Is it religion? Is it money? Is it myth? Tonight, we're digging into the pages history tried to burn, because before the Holocaust, before pogroms, there was something worse. A pattern, and it's time we see it. Let's be clear from the start. The Jewish story isn't just a tale of survival. It's a story of displacement, of being pushed, pulled, blamed, used, and exiled again and again. Most people think of exile as a single moment Jerusalem falls. The people scatter and history moves on. But that's not how it happened. It happened over and over again. Across continents, across empires, across belief systems. It didn't matter who ruled: Christian kings, Muslim sultans, atheist, commissar. Again and again, one small group became the convenient enemy. Let's trace the map of memory through time and space. Ask why. 70 AD, the fall of Jerusalem. Rome, the mightiest empire the world had ever known, marched into Jerusalem to crush a rebellion. They destroyed the Second Temple, the heart of Jewish identity, culture, and worship. Tens of thousands were killed. The survivors were dragged across the empire, sold as slaves, scattered to the winds. This was the beginning of the Diaspora, the scattering of the Jewish people. But it was only the beginning. 1290, England's silent expulsion. Under King Edward I, Jews were formally expelled from England. Why? Officially, for usury, for being different, for being other. But here's the real story. The Crown owed Jewish moneylenders massive debts. Rather than repay them, Edward simply expelled them. He seized their assets, erased their rights, and declared it righteous. Thousands were forced with only what they could carry. The rest were imprisoned, or worse. For over 350 years no Jews legally lived in England. A nation built on law, chivalry, and the Magna Carta had no place for Jews. 1492, Spain, the year of glory and grief. 1492 is remembered for Columbus discovering the New World. But that same year, Spain committed a cultural genocide. The Alhambra Decree gave every Jew in Spain a choice: convert, leave, or die. Estimates suggest over 200,000 Jews fled, many to the Ottoman Empire, North Africa, and the Balkans. Tens of thousands more were tortured, burned, or forced to convert only to be hunted later by the Inquisition for secretly practicing Judaism. The golden age of Jewish philosophy, poetry, and medicine in Spain vanished almost overnight. The Jewish heart of Iberia was ripped out, and with it, centuries of coexistence. 1648 to 1700s, the Cossack massacres and Eastern. As Jews found refuge in Eastern Europe, new dangers followed. In 1648, Ukrainian Cossacks, under Bogdan Khmelnytsky, led a revolt against Polish rule. Caught in the crossfire, Jews seen as tax collectors, landlords, foreigners. As the Russian Empire swallowed up Polish-Lithuanian territories, it inherited millions of Jews. But instead of granting them rights, Russia created the Pale of Sutamentha massive zone, where Jews were allowed to live, but only under restrictions. Jews couldn't live in big cities, hold government jobs, or attend universities. Then came the pogroms. Between 1881 and 1884, and again in the early 1900s mobs were incited to violence. Houses were burned, synagogues smashed, children orphaned. These weren't isolated events. They were organized, or at least tolerated, by the authorities. And soon, the exodus began. Over 2 million Jews fled Eastern Europe between 1880 and 1920, most of them to America. They weren't immigrants chasing a dream. They were refugees escaping a nightmare. 20th century, even modern nations were not immune. The 20th century is often seen as the age of progress. But when it came to Jewish safety, even the most enlightened countries fell short. In the United States, quotas were introduced in universities. In Canada, Jewish refugees from Nazi Germany were turned away. In Argentina, anti-Semitic militias attacked Jewish neighborhoods in the 1930s. In France, the Dreyfus affair reminded Jews that even in the Republic, they were suspect. And of course, we all know what happened in Nazi Germany. But what most people don't know is that centuries of expulsions, myths, and ghettoization set the stage for the Holocaust. Final words. This isn't just a list of dates. It's a map of a pattern where a people is welcomed, used, envied, and expelled over 100 times in over 1,000 years. This didn't happen despite civilization. It happened because of it in some of the most advanced, religious, or democratic societies of their day. It raises a hard question. What does it mean when one group is forced to leave, again and again? And what does it say about the world that let it happen? But this is not a story of victimhood. If you've listened only for tragedy, you've missed the point. This is a story of resistance through identity, of rebuilding after every fall. The Jewish people didn't just survive history. They challenged it. They refused to disappear, refused to let their story be written by those who hated them, refused to bow either to empires or to forgetting. This is not a eulogy. This is a tribute to the woman lighting Sabbath candles after her family was burned, to the boy learning Hebrew in a refugee camp, to the scholar rewriting Torah from memory behind barbed wire, to the artist painting hope in a new land, to the belief that no matter what came, the story would continue. So what can we learn? We live in a world drowning in information, but starving for wisdom. The legacy of Jewish exile and return reminds us that identity must be a shield, not a weapon. That difference is not a threat, but a treasure. That persecution often begins with a whisper and ends with a fire. That remembering is not weakness, it is power. History doesn't repeat because we forget. It repeats because we refuse to look honestly at what we remember. To all who listen, to be Jewish is to carry 1,000 voices inside you. Voices that argue, voices that pray, voices that mourn, voices that refuse to be silenced. But this story isn't theirs alone. It belongs to every person who wonders what it means to belong, to carry memory, to stand firm against hatred, to believe in justice even when the world turns away. This is not the end. This is the beginning of asking better questions, of seeing each other more clearly, of resisting the urge to fear the other. Because when we learn this story, truly learn it, we don't just understand Jewish history, we understand humanity. So the next time someone asks, why were the Jews expelled so often? Don't just answer with dates. Answer with courage, with truth, with questions that demand better answers. Because buried inside that painful question is a warning, a mirror, and a choice. Let's not just study the past. Let's finally learn from it. Exile doesn't happen in a vacuum. People don't just wake up one day and decide to evict their neighbors. There has to be a story first, a lie, a myth, because every expulsion in history was preceded by something far more dangerous than weapons, or orders, a rumor, a whisper in the marketplace, a sermon twisted into blame, a headline dripping with venom. It wasn't swords that started the exile, it was stories. Myth number 1. Blood libel. The lie that wouldn't die visual. Illustration of a boy in red robes, surrounded by torches. A shadowy figure in a tallit is accused. Dramatic whispers echo. It began in 12th century England. A Christian boy, William of Norwich, was found dead in the forest. No proof, no witnesses, no investigation. But a rumor spread. Jews had murdered him in a ritual sacrifice. They said Jews drained his blood to bake into Passover matzah. Absurd, yes, but deadly. This became the first documented blood libel, and it spread like wildfire. Over the next 800 years, similar accusations would surface in France, Germany, Spain, Poland, and even into the 20th century. The formula was simple. A child disappears. A Jewish community is nearby. The mob wants revenge. No trial, no evidence, no escape. Entire Jewish communities were burned, tortured, or massacred for nothing more than myth. It was easier to believe the lie than face truth, and the myth never died. Even in Nazi propaganda, Jews were still painted as bloodthirsty monsters. In modern anti-Semitic cartoons across the Middle East and Europe, you still find the blood libel image recycled. A lie born in the forest of Norwich became a tool of genocide. Myth number 2. Plague and poison. When death needed a scapegoat visual, Black Death sweeping across Europe. People praying, others pointing fingers. A Jewish man dragged from his home. The Black Death tore through Europe in the 14th century, killing an estimated 1/3 of the continent. People were desperate for answers. Why was everyone dying? Medicine couldn't explain it. Priests said it was God's punishment, but fear demanded a target. And once again, the Jews were accused. The myth that they had poisoned the wells of Christian towns, that their rituals brought plague, that their very presence was toxic. The irony, Jews often died in lower numbers, because their religious cleanliness laws accidentally helped, but that difference became fuel for suspicion. If they weren't dying like us, they must be causing it. The result, entire Jewish neighborhoods wiped out by angry mobs. Jews burned alive in Strasbourg in 1340, 900s thrown into flames, synagogues razed, Torah scrolls destroyed. Europe didn't just face a plague of disease. It faced a plague of myth-fueled violence. Myth number 3. Greedy moneylenders. The economic scapegoat for centuries, Jews were barred from owning land. They couldn't farm, they couldn't join guilds, they couldn't be soldiers or nobles, so what could they do? Often, only one profession was left. And not because Jews chose it, but because they were forced into it. Christian laws in medieval Europe forbade usury, but kingdoms still needed loans, so they turned to Jews. At first, Jews became useful to kings financing wars, building castles, funding trade, but then the debt grew. Is a dangerous thing, because the easiest way to clear your balance sheet, expel the lender. Take England, 1290, France, 1306, Austria, 1421. Everywhere the story was the same. Jews lent money to the crown. The crown couldn't repay. The crown blamed them. Jews were expelled, and their property seized. This myth, the greedy Jew, stuck. It's why Shylock in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice still sparks controversy today. And it laid the groundwork for 20th century propaganda where Jewish bankers were blamed for World War I, the Great Depression, and the collapse of empires. It was never about gold. It was always about power and the need for a scapegoat. Myth number 4. The eternal outsider. Loyalty in question, another myth. More subtle yet, just as deadly, that the Jews could never be loyal, that no matter where they lived, how long they stayed, how much they contributed, they were always foreigners. In Germany, Jews served in World War I, dying alongside their neighbors, but by 1930, Hitler's narrative painted them as traitors, subverters, and aliens. In Russia, Jews were accused of being bourgeois traitors during the Bolshevik Revolution, then purged under Stalin as Zionist conspirators. The myth is shape-shifting. In one country, Jews are in the next, they're capitalists. In both, they're dangerous. This paradox fueled every pogrom, every expulsion, every law that denied citizenship. The Jew was always the other, and being other made them expendable. Myth number 5. The puppet master. Global conspiracy, perhaps the most modern and most widespread myth of all. The Jews secretly control the world. It traces back to the forged document, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, published in Tsarist Russia in 1903. The text claimed to expose a Jewish plan for world domination. It was entirely fake, fabricated, planted, weaponized, but it didn't matter. People believed it. Henry Ford distributed it across America. Hitler cited it in main camps. Today, it still circulates online on forums, in memes, in whispers. This myth has outlived kings and regimes. It feeds on fear, it turns victims into villains, and it erases centuries of suffering by pretending it was all part of a plan. Why these myths matter? These myths didn't just justify hatred, they normalized it, they legalized it, they institutionalized it. They allowed otherwise decent people to look away or worse, join in. A burning synagogue didn't seem evil if you believed it was hiding a blood cult. A deported family didn't seem tragic. ... If you believed they controlled the banks. That's the danger of myth. It doesn't just cloud the past, it poisons the present. Money, it builds empires. It wins wars, it promises power, but when the bill comes, someone must pay. And too often in history, the ones blamed were the ones holding the ledgers. Let's talk about one of the most misunderstood and manipulated truths of Jewish history. The myth of wealth and the trap of survival, forced into finance, not by choice, but by law. In medieval Europe, Jews were systematically excluded from almost every traditional profession. They couldn't own land. They weren't allowed in craft guilds. They couldn't be knights, farmers, or city councillors. They were forbidden from joining the clergy in both Christian and Islamic empires. So where could they go? In many regions, there was only one legal option, not because it was easy, not because it was lucrative, but because it was the only profession open to Jews that allowed survival. Ironically, Christian doctrine at the time considered charging interest a sin, but kings, lords, and bishops still needed loans, so they outsourced the sin to Jews. A dangerous bargain. The role was clear. Jews would lend money on behalf of kings. They would act as tax collectors. They would finance roads, palaces, and crusades. And for a time, it worked. Monarchs relied on Jewish financiers to fund wars. Jewish lenders operated under royal protection, but that protection came with a price. Because, as debts grew, so did resentment. The peasants saw Jewish tax agents collecting money on behalf of a crown they hated. The clergy saw Jews profiting from interest while preaching sin from the pulpit. And the kings, they began to see an easy solution to their own rising debts. Cancel the debt, burn the creditor over and over. A brutal pattern repeated. The Crown borrows vast sums from Jewish lenders. Public resentment builds. Accusations of greed, usury, or conspiracy are stirred often from the pulpit. A decree is issued. Expulsion, confiscation, destruction. England, 1290. King Edward I owed massive debts. He expelled all Jews and seized their property. France, 1306. King Philip IV used Jewish lenders to finance his wars, then expelled them, cancelled the debt, and took everything they owned. Austria, 1421. After years of taxation and lending, Jews were accused of heresy. Hundreds were burned alive, their homes and wealth absorbed into the state. Spain, 1492. A golden age of Jewish culture ended with forced conversion, exile, and theft. Everywhere this happened, it followed the same formula. Use Jewish money to build the kingdom, use religious myth to turn public opinion, then burn the bridge and call it justice. The explosive power of economic myth. From the medieval era to modern times, the idea of Jewish wealth has been weaponized. Here's the twist. Most Jews throughout history were not wealthy. They lived in ghettos, faced constant expulsion, and had few assets. But perception, especially in times of hardship, is more powerful than truth. In the 19th and 20th centuries, this myth evolved again. Jews were blamed for the rise of capitalism in some countries. Elsewhere, they were blamed for spreading communism. In Nazi Germany, the idea of the greedy Jewish banker became central to Hitler's propaganda. He accused Jews of orchestrating Germany's defeat in World War I, of collapsing the economy, of owning the press, the banks, the culture. The result? 6 million dead, a people nearly erased. All because a lie about money had centuries to grow. A history trapped in perception. What happens to a people when they are only ever seen as useful or dangerous, depending on how the winds shift? Jews were caught in a financial trap. Needed when money flowed, demonized when it didn't. Visible in success, invisible in poverty. They weren't just bankers. They were butchers, poets, midwives, scientists, scribes, refugees. But history rarely paints with a full brush. More than just blame. A cautionary tale. This isn't just about past kings and medieval debts. This is about how economic fear breeds social hatred, about how it's easier to blame a group for a downturn than to understand a system. Today, similar tropes re-emerge online. The Jews control the media. They rig the banks. They're behind global finance. Each is a modern echo of medieval propaganda. Each starts with a grain of envy, then grows into fire. But when we fall for that myth, we don't just rewrite history, we repeat it. In the end, the story of Jews and money isn't about gold or greed. It's about survival in a world that closed every other door. It's about people who turned necessity into resilience and were punished for both. This is not just a financial history. It's the blueprint of a trap, set not by the victims, but by those who needed someone to blame. And as long as that blueprint exists, so does the danger of history repeating itself. 1492. For most, it's a year that marks the dawn of exploration. Columbus sails west. The New World opens. But for hundreds of thousands of Jews in Spain, 1492 marked the end of a world, because that same year, while ships were setting sail, the Spanish crown lit a match that would ignite centuries of fear. They called it the Alhambra Decree. History would remember it as one of the most brutal acts of religious cleansing in Europe. The Golden Age that turned to ash for centuries. Under Muslim rule, Spain Al-Andalus was a mosaic of cultures. Jews they weren't just tolerated, they were respected. Jewish physicians served in royal courts, scholars translated Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic texts into Latin. Jewish poets, astronomers, and merchants lived side by side with Muslims and Christians. Spain was a rare exception in a dark time, but with the Christian Reconquista, things began to shift. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella completed the conquest in 1492, reclaiming Granada, the last Muslim stronghold, and then they turned inward, to unify the realm not just by sword, but by faith. The rise of religious uniformity. Ferdinand and Isabella wanted one nation under one religion. Christianity wasn't just spiritual, it became political armor, and any difference was seen as division. Jews had lived in Spain for over 1,000 years, but now they were seen as an obstacle to unity. Worse, even those who converted to Christianity, often under duress, were no longer trusted. They were called conversos, or new Christians, and even though they attended church, wore crosses, baptized their children, the Inquisition believed that many still practiced Judaism in secret, and so began one of the darkest institutions in European history, the Spanish Inquisition. Fear behind every door. The Inquisition was not a court, it was a trap. Neighbors were encouraged to accuse one another. A passing rumor could cost you your freedom or your life. If you were accused of Judaizing, keeping kosher, observing Shabbat, whispering Hebrew prayers, you were taken. No lawyer, no witnesses, no appeal. You were tortured until you confessed, and if you didn't confess, you died anyway. Tens of thousands were arrested. Many were paraded through the streets in public auto-da fé, acts of faith. Their punishment, humiliation, imprisonment, execution. Some were burned alive in public squares as the crowds sang hymns. And all of this was justified in the name of faith. The Alhambra Decree, convert, leave, or die. Then came March 31st, 1492. The monarchs issued a decree. All Jews must leave Spain by July 31st. They had just 4 months. No money, no property, no way back. An estimated 200,000 Jews were expelled. They fled to the Ottoman Empire, to North Africa, to Italy, and later to Amsterdam and Salonika. Everything they had ever known: homes, books, language, graves. Generations buried in Iberian soil, lost overnight. Even for those who converted to stay behind, their story wasn't safe. Many were tracked for generations, interrogated, tortured, and tried. You couldn't escape by converting. You could only escape by vanishing. The death of Sifared. The Jews of Spain called their home Sifared. It was not just a place, it was an identity. A golden chapter of Jewish history destroyed in flames. The Alhambra Decree wasn't lifted until 1968. Spain waited nearly 500 years to officially revoke it. 5 centuries of silence. Today, descendants of expelled Sephardic Jews still keep keys to homes that no longer exist, keys passed down like sacred relics, engraved with addresses they'll never return to. Their Ladino language, a blend of Spanish and Hebrew, still echoes in song, like the ghost of a vanished world. A new world, a lost people. Here's a haunting detail. Most history books skip the same day. Columbus set sail for the Americas. August 3rd, 1492 was the last day for Jews to leave Spain. As one future began across the Atlantic, another ended in silence. Columbus' ships disappeared into the horizon. As Jewish families disappeared into history, Spain did not just lose its Jewish population, it lost its scientists, doctors, translators, philosophers, poets. It exchanged tolerance for terror, and centuries later it still bears the silence of that exchange. The Inquisition wasn't a moment in time, it was a philosophy. That faith must be enforced. That difference must be crushed. That memory must be burned. But memory doesn't die. It hides, it whispers, it waits, and if we listen closely we can still hear the prayers of echoing through time. What is identity? If it survives everything meant to erase it, expulsions, inquisitions, pogroms, Holocaust, migration, every force in history tried to fragment the Jewish people, and yet somehow, across centuries, across continents, across calamities they remained. But they didn't just survive, they transformed. They turned exile into wisdom, displacement into resilience, and silence into song. Diaspora, a people without a land, but never without a center after Spain. Jews scattered further than ever before, but they didn't vanish. In Salonika, they built printing presses and synagogues that echoed with Ladino prayers. In Amsterdam, they flourished under relative tolerance, producing philosophers like Baruch Spinoza. In Poland, they established yeshivat centers of learning, so intense, scholars studied by candlelight until their eyes failed. In North Africa, they traded spices, wrote poetry, and fused Jewish tradition with Berber and Arab culture. Each exile created a new version of Jewish life. There was no longer one Judaism, there were many faces. Ashkenazi, born in Europe's forests and ghettos. Sephardi, carrying the memory of Iberia. Mizrahi, rooted in Babylon and Persia. Beta Israel, preserving the Torah in the highlands of Ethiopia. Bene Israel, living in India with their own melodies and rituals. This wasn't fragmentation, it was multiplication. Identity didn't break, it evolved. Memory as resistance. What happens when history tries to erase a people? They write it down. No other people in history has made remembering such a sacred act. The Torah says, Zach, remember. Every Jewish festival, every Sabbath, every prayer is a lesson in historical memory. Passover isn't just about ancient Egypt, it's about liberation in every generation. Tisha B'Av isn't just about one destroyed temple, it's about every time a home was taken away. Purim is not just about Queen Esther, it's about surviving hate with courage. For Jews, history is not something you visit in museums. It's something you carry in ritual, in language, in food, in names, and in that act of remembrance there's defiance, a quiet, stubborn refusal to be forgotten. Post-Holocaust identity, faith and fracture. Then came the 20th century, the industrialized slaughter of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, the near erasure of European Jewry. And yet again, the identity refused to die. Instead, it shifted once more. Out of the ashes rose a new kind of Jewish consciousness. For some, it was about faith, a return to tradition, observance, and continuity. For others, it was about justice, supporting civil rights, fighting for minorities, standing against fascism. For many, it was about Zionism, the dream of a homeland, reborn in the land of ancestors, but not without tension. Some Jews found solace in Israel. Others found meaning in rebuilding diaspora communities. Some turned inward, others outward. The trauma of the Holocaust didn't unite Jews, it complicated identity even further. Because now the question wasn't just who are we, it was how do we live, knowing what the world did, and knowing we're still here. Israel, homeland, hope, and debate. The founding of Israel in 1948 was more than political, it was psychological. It said to the world, we are no longer just guests in other lands. For many Jews, it was the fulfillment of prophecy. For others, a modern refuge. For some, a controversial nation with complex politics and painful consequences. The truth, Israel became a mirror reflecting every internal Jewish debate. Tradition versus modernity. Religion versus secularism, memory versus aspiration, security versus ethics. Today, Israel is a place of innovation, conflict, culture, and contradiction. But more than anything, it is the proof that identity can become institution, that after 2,000 years of wandering, a people could again plant roots. But the question remains, does Israel define Jewishness? Or is Jewishness something that has always transcended borders? Jewish identity in the 21st century today. Jewish identity is more diverse than ever. Some are Orthodox, wrapped in tradition. Others are cultural Jews, who eat challah but don't pray. Some find Jewishness in social justice, others in intellectual inquiry. Some Jews don't believe in God yet, live proudly Jewish lives. And many young Jews ask hard questions. What does it mean to inherit exile? Can I criticize Israel and still be Jewish? How do I honor tradition without being bound by it? And perhaps most powerfully, what does Jewishness mean when you're not always welcomed as a Jew? Because Jews of color, converts, and interfaith Jews are rewriting the boundaries of identity again, just as their ancestors did in Babylon, Spain, and Poland. Jewish identity is not one thing. It is a paradox, a question, a journey. It is exile and return, faith and doubt, memory and invention. It's the child lighting Shabbat candles in Cape Town. It's the professor decoding Talmud in Boston. It's the farmer in the Galilee, the comedian in New York, the refugee in Paris, the dissident in Tehran. And behind them all, a lineage of survival that no empire, no sword, no decree could destroy, because Jewish identity was never about power. It was about meaning. It was about asking, in every generation, who are we? And answering not just with words, but with life. So now we arrive at the end of our journey. But if you've truly been listening, you know this isn't just a Jewish story. This is a human story of power and powerlessness, of belief and betrayal, of exile and return. For over 2,000 years, the Jewish people have walked a razor-thin line between being tolerated and being targeted. They've been labeled as enemies of kings, tools of empires, puppeteers of revolutions. They've been used, expelled, accused, massacred, scapegoated, not because of what they did, but because of what others chose not to understand. Why this history matters now? We like to believe we've evolved, that modern society has moved beyond the myths. But look around. Old lies wear new costumes. Today's conspiracy theories are yesterday's sermons of hate. Anti-Jewish tropes spread faster than ever on phones, in classrooms, in politics. Holocaust denial is rising. Violent attacks on Jews in Europe, in America, in the Middle East are no longer rare. And still, many ask, why the Jews? Why always them? As if history hasn't already answered that question, as if the roots of hate aren't deep, tangled, and constantly reborn. A warning to the world. Let this be clear. What starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. In every era where Jews were hunted, others soon followed. Roma, LGBTQ, Muslims, immigrants, artists, thinkers, the poor. Because antisemitism is not just racism, it's a mirror of society's sickness. It emerges when people are afraid, when they want answers that feel simple, when leaders want enemies more than they want solutions. The Jews become the mythical other, blamed for capitalism, blamed for communism, blamed for war, blamed for peace. It is always easier to burn a neighbor's book than to write your own. But this is not a story of victimhood. If you've listened only for tragedy, you've missed the point. This is a story of resistance through identity. of rebuilding after every fall. The Jewish people didn't just survive history. They challenged it. They refused to disappear, refused to let their story be written by those who hated them, refused to bow either to empires or to forgetting. This is not a eulogy. This is a tribute to the woman lighting Sabbath candles after her family was burned, to the boy learning Hebrew in a refugee camp, to the scholar rewriting Torah from memory behind barbed wire, to the artist painting hope in a new land, to the belief that no matter what came, the story would continue. So what can we learn? We live in a world drowning in information, but starving for wisdom. The legacy of Jewish exile and return reminds us that identity must be a shield, not a weapon. That difference is not a threat, but a treasure. That persecution often begins with a whisper and ends with a fire. That remembering is not weakness, it is power. History doesn't repeat because we forget. It repeats because we refuse to look honestly at what we remember. To all who listen, to be Jewish is to carry 1,000 voices inside you. Voices that argue, voices that pray, voices that mourn, voices that refuse to be silenced. But this story isn't theirs alone. It belongs to every person who wonders what it means to belong, to carry memory, to stand firm against hatred, to believe in justice even when the world turns away. This is not the end. This is the beginning of asking better questions, of seeing each other more clearly, of resisting the urge to fear the other. Because when we learn this story, truly learn it, we don't just understand Jewish history, we understand humanity. So the next time someone asks, why were the Jews expelled so often? Don't just answer with dates. Answer with courage, with truth, with questions that demand better answers. Because buried inside that painful question is a warning, a mirror, and a choice. Let's not just study the past. Let's finally learn from it.